Right. Okay. So yeah, so it's lovely to see those of you who are watching live, and also thank you for watching if you're on recorded. Um, for my section, I'm joined by Claire here. We're going to talk about a couple of things, but they are connected. The first is I'll be picking up where we left off in Big Heart, and you remember we did an experiment at a distance between two people. So I'll show you the processed results of that and talk a little bit about really what the science is showing us, just recap on that. And then I'll hand over to Claire to talk about what that means to our relationships, because that's really why we do this work. It's not just for the science, which is interesting in itself. So let's just get cracking on that. So you remember what we did was we had Claire in one room here with me next to me, and Melisha was over in, let me just get rid of the gallery so it's in the way. There we go. And Melisha was over in Hertfordshire, 38 miles away. And they couldn't see or hear each other, and there were no telephones running. There was the internet running with the apps we were using, but they didn't see that data, and it was just so we could record it at either end. So no sensory cues whatsoever. So that was the setup. And the question is, can we communicate between each other? And the answer was a categoric yes in this case, because it was a really interesting result. And this is a speeded up video of the data. And this is the heart rates in blue and red. Claire was in blue, Melisha was in red. And you can see quite clearly that they are correlating, even in some detail. So that is the final result there. And you can see it down here on the bottom right. So Claire's in red there, and Melisha's in, sorry, Claire's in blue, Melisha's in red. And you'll notice that Claire's breathing, which is really being shown by this blue signal here, the heart rate variability, we call that, is of a longer, well, she's breathing slower than Melisha. So Claire's running at about 4 or 5 seconds in and out breath, whereas Melisha's probably three or 4, even 2 to 3 in places. So Melisha's breathing faster, but you'll notice that they're still tending to correlate across here. And we've seen this time and time again. On the top left here, you can see the same thing happening. This was between Claire and myself in a room 2 meters apart. And you can't really tell the difference between these two graphs. And that's what we're finding over and over again with our experiments. There is something that's causing this correlation between the two signals. So that was the experiment on Big Heart. Sorry, it's just run again. Let me just get rid of that video. There we go. Right. Now, hopefully you'll also recall that we can look at the heart rate variability, the changing heart rate with time, and look at the actual patterns of that signal. So if it's a very noisy pattern, it is something that's associated with anger, fear, frustration, worry, negative emotions in general. Whereas if it turns to this sine wave pattern, which is related to breathing, the in and out of breath, we know this is associated with care, appreciation, and positive emotion. So that's what we saw at Big Heart, which I explained a little. And we call that coherence. And we can extract the coherence from the experiment I've just shown you. And you can see that both Claire and Melisha are tending to track each other in terms of coherence. So their positive feelings are going up and down at the same time. This, again, is typical of what we're seeing in all our experiments. So this next experiment is one that we recorded prior to Big Heart as a practice. And I'll just let it run. This is 143 miles apart. So I was 143 miles away from Melisha and doing exactly what Claire and Melisha were doing. So no telephones, no sensory communication whatsoever. And you can see the heart rates synchronizing at the top. But what I particularly wanted to show you was that lower graph. This is it just plotted out. Again, the coherence is synchronizing well too. But the difference between this experiment is that I was deliberately focusing on Melisha where my signal's green is high here, but distracting myself where it's low. And you can see that I was affecting her heart rate patterns quite clearly through him. So in other words, we can vary someone else's coherence at a distance. But we can also do that close by. And we've seen this over and over again in our experiments. Here, Claire's in red, her heart rate's in red, mine's in blue. And you can see where I become more coherent, her heart rate rises. And again, become more coherent, it rises once again. Sorry, I'm on there. So yeah, so that is what we've really discovered. And so if we now move to the actual conclusions, we know that we can synchronize with someone else locally or at a distance, non-locally, when we experience love, appreciation, or gratitude for each other. We can also influence another person's heart rate, even if they're distracted, locally and at a distance. And this is showing, because we know there's no conventional sensory information here, that there must be some form of energetic connection here. There's something causing this correlation. We're communicating unconsciously in some way. So that's the scientific conclusions. And the question of why, we talked a little bit about at Big Heart, but really people who are doing any sort of work like this, parapsychological work as it's called, tend to think of the brain as the communication media, brain to brain. But it could be that the heart to heart is communicating, or it could be the whole system. Nobody really knows. This needs far more research. But my best guess is it's some form of quantum communication going on through the quantum mechanical area. So this is really the overall conclusion, is that love is connection, connection is love. When we experience love, we experience our natural connection. And it's all about relationship, and it's about the quality of that relationship. So let me hand over to Claire, and she can talk about relationship.
Okay, so you wouldn't be here if you didn't believe this in part, that we are all connected, and that's what, you know, brings us joy in our lives, and that's what we were working towards. However, it's just plain difficult. It's not like every day is easy, and I don't know how the period for you's been since we've had Big Heart, you know, the last 3 weeks or so. But I have certainly had a challenge, and I would imagine most people, if not everyone here, has had a challenge, even if it's a small one, in the relationships that we have every day. Sometimes it's, I mean, cut up at the roundabout, and in other times it might be more serious. And Liz was generous enough to share a situation that she found herself in with a group of friends. And certainly for me, I received just last week actually a phone call from someone who's extremely close to me with a huge attack, and I was completely taken back by it, in all honesty. And no matter how much of this work you do, no matter how many experiments you've done, and Peter and I have done, we reckon it's about 1,000, showing this for real, when you get a phone call from someone attacking you, well, in my case, my heart just sank. And Liz was talking earlier about, you know, closing heart and keeping a heart open. And to be honest, I had to work really hard in that instance to keep my heart open. But it's the work that we've done and the experiments that we've done really helped me. So during the course of the conversation that was going on, I would imagine that my heart rate was a little bit like the picture you're seeing at the moment, which I unscientifically describe as a scratchy pattern. Now, this wasn't me and the other person. This was me and Peter on a day when things were not going terribly well. But you can see that there is no flow there. There's tiny little bits where we do meet each other. There is coherence, but basically he was stressed, I was stressed, and yes, connected, we weren't. And then what we're doing in Heart Bond at the moment is we're looking at the fact that we've got all of this data, we're showing how we are connecting, but what does that do for us? How does that make our lives better? How do we deal with it on a day-by-day basis? Relationships are everything, true. My word, they can be tricky, they can be demanding, and actually it's poor relationships can just bring us to our knees. So what we're really looking at is a three-pronged approach. Again, very similar to what Liz was talking about, because it's all within the heart-centered realm, really. And within that, it starts with self, it moves on to others, and finally, it ends up with a word that we've used in Liz's word, which is whole, but you might want to use a word such as spiritual, depending on your standpoint. So here I was with this unexpected and very upsetting phone call, and basically I had a choice on how I was going to deal with it. And yes, if I'm honest, for a moment the easiest thing would be to say an awful lot back, and just to respond, you know, I was being attacked and therefore to attack back. But drawing on the fact that I know that we're all connected because I've seen it so often, I had to focus really on that sort of the phase 2, the step 2, the others, and the fact that we're all part of a whole. So in taking a moment and stepping away, the phone call ended in the end, and taking time, I could then think, okay, I have it within my ability to help the relationship and to heal the relationship. Now, this isn't a neat story. This was a really difficult situation, and I'll tell you, I haven't come to the end of it. This is, you know, I am midway through this process. But by using our knowledge and just having the understanding that if we're all part of one, if we are all connected, then really try and feel what that other person's feeling. And our work has shown that distance is basically irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether you're sat next to someone like Peter and I are here, or whether you're halfway around the world. It really doesn't matter. So I can send this person loving thoughts, positive thoughts, just thinking about holding her hand, giving her a hug, by way of laying the pathway, so that when we have a conversation, which we're going to have fairly soon, I've already done an awful lot of work to help her coherence, to help her mood and her well-being. And in Liz's story, she talked about the fact that she did something very similar. She was having a relationship with friends, and it was all a bit upsy-downsy maybe, and she took the leadership and then moved it forward. And that's why I think in this model we shouldn't discount the self and how important we are in this, because very often it falls on us to be the leaders in that kind of situation. If we've done the work on heart-centered living or heart connection, then we've put ourselves in that space. And in order to have that leadership, I think you have to spend time on ourselves to really understand what our talents are, how we can lead. And what Peter and I are doing at the moment is we're formalizing this model. Now that we've come to the end, really, of the research that we're doing, is how we can apply this in our lives. There's lots of articles and research that are coming out at the moment. It's proof if you need proof. So this was a New Scientist, which was just this week, where they did an enormous study, I think, to have 450,000 people. And it proved that you spend more time with the people you love, then you have more or less a 40 40% better chance of living longer. There's other researchers, there's the Blue Dot survey at the moment that looked at people who's living to 100 and showed that they had good connections when they were living a long and happy life. So if nothing else, connection makes you live better. So I'm being told I need to shush because I've gone way over my time. So apologies on that, Liz. And I think we're handing over to Louise now.